The alien planet of Velara glimmered with vibrant colors as the twin suns began their descent below the horizon. The city sprawled out beneath the clear sky, a blend of gleaming towers and verdant gardens, all tied together by winding rivers and crystalline walkways. It was a place of beauty, harmony, and power, a place where every alien being seemed to move with purpose, as though born to command and lead. But among them stood Arden, the only human in the crowd, a figure of solitude and restraint. He was stationed here as part of a peacekeeping mission, a symbol of cooperation between his people and the alien races. Yet, to those who saw him walking the streets of Velara, he might as well have been a ghost. He kept his head down, his presence unnoticed, as he traversed the bustling avenues of the capital city. There were no friendly gestures, no waves of acknowledgement, just the occasional curious glance from an alien passerby. Arden had never been good at fitting in. And on this world, it was no different. The alien beings here were beautiful in ways that made human beauty seem dull by comparison. Tall, with glowing skin that shimmered under the planet's dual suns, their eyes were luminous and full of knowledge, their movements fluid and graceful. But there was something else, something that made Arden feel as though he were a stranger in this world. It wasn't the differences in appearance. It wasn't the language or customs. No, it was the history that haunted him, the reason he was here in the first place. The human was the product of a long history of conflict. His people had suffered countless losses in the wars with the alien species, including a devastating event that tore apart the very fabric of his family. For Arden, it wasn't just about politics or alliances. It was about healing. But every time he looked at the alien faces around him, all he could see was the past, the trauma, the destruction. So he kept his distance. It wasn't that he hated them. No, that was too strong. He didn't hate anyone, not really. But he couldn't bring himself to trust them either, not after what he had lost. His steps slowed as he neared the grand palace. It loomed ahead, a towering structure of gleaming white stone and intricate designs. The corridors within were lined with shimmering tapestries that depicted historical events, some of which left a bitter taste in his mouth. He had been assigned to the palace as part of the peacekeeping team, a human representative for the intergalactic agreement. But he hadn't made any friends here, not really. Sure, there were people who smiled at him, who offered pleasantries, but he never allowed himself to get too close. He couldn't, not after everything he'd seen, not after everything that had been taken from him. Today was no different. Arden was on his way to a royal banquet, a high-profile event where the elite of Velara would gather to celebrate another step toward peace. The air was thick with anticipation. He would stand by, speak when spoken to, smile when required, and retreat when the event concluded. But something was different this time. Someone was watching him. He felt her before he saw her. The sensation of eyes upon him, sharp and curious, like a bead of light cutting through a shadowed room. Arden's breath caught in his throat, and he quickly turned his gaze to the side, instinctively looking for the source. And there she was. Princess Velara, tall, graceful, and every bit as radiant as the legends described. Her flowing gown shimmered with the colors of the setting sun, golden threads catching the light with each movement. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded down her back in waves, a contrast to the ethereal glow of her skin. Her eyes, however, were what captivated him. They weren't just bright, they were intense, searching, understanding, and she was staring directly at him. Arden froze. He didn't know how long they stood there, locked in that moment of silent tension. It was as if the entire world had fallen away, leaving just the two of them standing in the middle of the grand hall. Velara smiled, a small, knowing smile that seemed to say, "I see you." And then, with effortless grace, she moved through the crowd, gliding toward him. Her presence was magnetic, and Arden found himself unable to turn away, despite every instinct telling him to keep his distance. "You are human," she said, her voice soft but commanding. She was standing in front of him now, her eyes never leaving his. Arden felt his throat tighten. He had been trained for diplomacy. He knew how to play the part. But in this moment, all the words he had prepared seemed to escape him. He nodded stiffly, managing a simple, "Yes, Your Highness." The princess studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing, like she was reading him in ways he couldn't understand. "Why do you stay away from us, human?" she asked, her tone both inquisitive and challenging. The question caught him off guard, and for a moment he struggled to form a response. He couldn't simply say nothing. She deserved an answer. But how could he explain something so deeply ingrained in his mind, in his heart? How could he make her understand the scars of his past? The fear of what his people had suffered and what he still feared could happen again? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He felt like he was drowning in the weight of her question. Selara waited. Her expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something else there, an expectation, perhaps. As if she knew there was more to his story and she wanted him to tell it. Arden exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He couldn't lie. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine. Not when the truth was staring him in the face. He began, but the words felt heavy. I lost everything, my family, my friends, my world, all because of the wars, because of people like you. The words were raw and they surprised him. He hadn't meant to say them, but once they were out, he couldn't take them back. His voice faltered as he continued. You don't understand. I can't be around you, around any of you. Every time I look at you, I see the bloodshed, I see the death. Selara didn't flinch. She didn't step back. Instead, she regarded him with something that was almost sympathy. But there was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. I didn't ask for this, she said softly, but I will stand beside you if you allow me to. There is more to my people than you see, more than you've been taught. You may not believe that now, but I will show you. Her words hung in the air, thick with promise and challenge. Arden stood frozen, caught between the past that had shaped him and the possibility of something new. Something that, for the first time in years, made him question his fear. But how could he trust her? How could he trust any of them? Before he could respond, the banquet began to stir, the music playing, the conversations growing louder. The moment was gone as quickly as it had arrived. But Selara's gaze lingered on him, a silent invitation to something more. And Arden couldn't ignore it. In the days that followed, Arden found himself walking the halls of the Velera Palace in a daze, his mind replaying the conversation he had with Princess Selara. Her words echoed in his thoughts, growing louder with each passing hour. I will stand beside you if you allow me to. Her gaze, calm and unwavering, had lingered on him long after the banquet ended, leaving a mark on his heart that he couldn't shake. He had tried to focus on his duties to push the thoughts of Selara and the conversation from his mind. But it was impossible. Every time he looked around the palace, he saw her. Her bright, golden skin, her eyes like twin suns, filled with curiosity and understanding. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't like the cold, distant aliens that had brought nothing but war and pain to his people. But still, Arden couldn't shake the nagging fear in his chest, the fear that something was about to go terribly wrong. His thoughts were interrupted when he was called to the royal chambers once again. He had become used to these summons, but today felt different. There was a new sense of urgency in the air, a quiet tension that only deepened his unease. As he walked down the long corridor toward the princess's private chambers, he noticed how the other palace staff moved with purpose, their faces serious, their eyes downcast. It was as if the entire palace was holding its breath. When he entered the room, Selara was waiting for him by the tall, arched windows that overlooked the vast cityscape. Her back was to him, her hands clasped behind her, but even from this distance, he could feel the weight of her gaze on him. Arden, she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had been born to lead. I need you to come with me. There is something I must show you. He nodded, his stomach tightening with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that whatever Selara had in mind wasn't just another diplomatic formality. This was something else. As they walked through the halls together, the silence between them was thick, filled with an unspoken understanding. Arden had been waiting for this moment, this chance to finally get answers to the questions that had been burning in his mind ever since he stepped foot on this planet. But now that he was standing beside her, he realized he wasn't sure what to ask, or even if he wanted to know the answers. Selara stopped in front of a door that Arden hadn't seen before. It was a heavy, ancient-looking door, its surface carved with intricate symbols and patterns that seemed to glow with an inner light. Arden could feel the energy radiating from it, and his curiosity piqued. This is the heart of Velera, Selara said, turning to him with a solemn expression. This is where the true history of my people is kept, where the truth lies. She reached for the door, and with a soft click it swung open, revealing a vast chamber inside. The walls were lined with holographic displays, showing images of the ancient past, the rise and fall of civilizations, battles fought in distant stars, and the creation of Valera itself. But it was the center of the room that captured Arden's attention. In the center there was a massive crystal, pulsating with energy. It glowed in shades of blue and purple, casting a soft, ethereal light across the room. Celara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the crystal. "This," she said, her voice quiet and reverent, "is the heart of our people. It is what has sustained us for centuries, and it is the reason why we are here today." Arden took a step forward, his heart racing. There was something mesmerizing about the crystal, something that called to him, but at the same time he felt a sense of dread creeping up his spine. He didn't know why, but he could sense that this moment, this discovery, would change everything. "You must understand," Celara continued, her gaze never leaving the crystal, "that the history you've been taught is not the full truth. The wars, the destruction, the loss, none of it was as it seemed. My people, we didn't start the wars. We were drawn into them, manipulated by forces we couldn't control, forces that sought to use us for their own gain." Arden's mind spun as he absorbed her words. For years, he had been taught to hate the aliens, to see them as the enemy, the ones responsible for the pain and loss his people had endured. But now, Celara was telling him something completely different, something that made him question everything he thought he knew. "You want me to believe that it wasn't your fault?" Arden asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. Celara turned to face him, her eyes steady. "I want you to understand the truth," she said softly. "Not everything is as it appears, Arden. The history you know, the pain you feel, it was all part of a much larger plan, a plan that was set into motion long before either of us were born. A plan that has yet to reach its conclusion." Arden swallowed hard, his mind racing to make sense of everything she had just revealed. It was hard enough to process his own trauma, let alone the idea that his entire worldview was built on lies. But something in Celara's voice told him that she wasn't lying, that she wasn't trying to deceive him. She believed what she was saying, and that was both terrifying and liberating at the same time. "What do you want me to do with this information?" he asked, his voice low. "I want you to help me," Celara replied. "I want you to stand with me to help me bring the truth to light. We have a chance to make things right, Arden, to end the cycle of violence that has haunted both our peoples for so long, but I cannot do it alone." Arden's heart was pounding in his chest. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment where he would have to choose between the past he had known and the future that Celara was offering him. It was a choice he didn't feel ready to make, but in his heart, he knew that there was no turning back now. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so long holding on to my anger, my fear, it's hard to let go." Celara stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone," she said. "I'll be with you every step of the way, but we have to act now before it's too late." Arden looked at her, his heart torn between the past and the possibility of something new. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could change the course of history. But it would take everything he had to make that hope a reality. "Okay," he said, his voice firm with determination. "I'll help you, but we do this together." Celara smiled, her expression softening. "Together," she echoed, "and we will rebuild what was lost." As they stood there, side by side in the heart of Valera, Arden knew that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but it was a journey worth taking. For the first time in a long while, he believed in something greater than himself. And it was with that belief that he stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days that followed were a blur for Arden. The decision he had made to stand with Celara felt like both a weight and a liberation. He had spent so many years shutting himself off from the world, running from the pain of his past, but now he had a purpose, a reason to move forward. He had made a promise to Celara, and it was one he was determined to keep. But as much as he had made his choice, doubts still crept into his mind. Every time he stood in the palace halls, walking alongside Celara, he couldn't help but wonder if he was making a mistake. It was easy to say the words, easy to agree to fight for peace, but living up to that promise was something entirely different. The scars of war, the losses, the hatred, it wasn't something you could simply erase with a few kind words. Yet when Celara spoke, something inside him stirred. There was a quiet strength in her voice, a certainty that he couldn't ignore, and perhaps it was that certainty more than anything else that kept him going. They spent their days working together, poring over the history of their people, uncovering secrets that had been buried for centuries. The more they uncovered, the more Arden realized just how much he had been kept in the dark. The truth was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The Velaran people, it seemed, had been pawns in a much larger game, one that had been orchestrated by forces far beyond their control. Arden had always thought of the Velarans as the enemy, as the ones responsible for the suffering of his people. But now, as he sat beside Celera in the royal archives, reading through ancient texts and maps, he couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for them. They had been victims of manipulation, just as much as humans had been. But sympathy didn't erase the pain, didn't undo the damage that had been done. And Arden knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There were still those who believed in the old ways, those who saw the alliance between humans and Velarans as a betrayal, a dangerous path that could lead to more destruction. And there were also the factions within the Velaran court, each with their own agendas, their own desires for power. Not everyone was as willing as Celera to embrace the truth. Not everyone was ready to face the consequences of their past actions. It was on one of those tense afternoons, as they pored over a particularly old scroll, that the first true test of their alliance arrived. A messenger entered the room, his face pale, his eyes wide with urgency. "Your Highness," the messenger said, bowing low to Celera. "The council requests your presence immediately. There has been a disturbance. A group of dissidents has gathered outside the palace." Celera stood at once, her face a mask of calm professionalism. "What are they demanding?" "They speak of the old ways," the messenger said, his voice trembling slightly. "They claim that the alliance with the humans is a betrayal of our people, that it will bring about the end of our civilization. They want you to renounce the treaty, to break your promise." Arden felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had known that not everyone would accept the truth so easily, but hearing it spoken aloud, seeing the weight of the unrest hanging over them, it was a sobering moment. He looked to Celera, who stood still, her expression unreadable. "We cannot let fear dictate our future," Celera said, her voice low but steady. "I will address them, but I need you with me, Arden. I need you to stand beside me." Arden hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He had made his choice. He had promised to stand with her, and he would do so no matter the cost. Together, they left the archives and made their way to the royal balcony that overlooked the palace grounds. The crowd below was restless, shouting and waving banners with symbols of rebellion. The noise was deafening, a mixture of anger and fear. Celera stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. The crowd quieted, their eyes fixed on her as she raised her hand to signal that she would speak. "I know why you are here," Celera began, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "I know the fear you feel, the uncertainty that grips your hearts. But I am here to tell you that the path we are walking is not a path of destruction. It is a path of healing." A murmur ran through the crowd, and for a moment it seemed as though they were listening. But then a voice rose from the back of the crowd, sharp and angry. "You speak of healing, Princess," the voice called. "But how can we heal when we have invited the humans into our very homes? How can we trust the ones who have brought nothing but war to our doorsteps?" The words struck Arden like a physical blow, and for a moment he felt himself falter. It wasn't the first time he had heard such accusations, but hearing them now in this moment with so many watching, it made him feel small, insignificant. But then he remembered the promise he had made. He remembered Celera's unwavering faith in him, in them. He stepped forward, his voice strong as he addressed the crowd. "The humans you speak of, I am one of them," he said. "And I can tell you this, not all humans are responsible for the wars. Not all of us seek destruction. Some of us want to build something better, together." The crowd fell silent. Arden could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but he knew it wasn't this. He wasn't the enemy they thought he was. He wasn't a monster, and maybe, just maybe, they could see that. Celera turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Together, they stood at the edge of the balcony, facing the crowd, united in their resolve. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The unrest didn't vanish that day. The dissidents didn't suddenly lay down their banners and embrace the peace they had fought against. But something shifted. The seeds of doubt were planted, and in the days that followed, the tension in the palace eased. Slowly, the voices of dissent grew quieter, and the calls for peace grew louder. But as they worked to rebuild, to heal, Arden knew that their struggle was far from over. There would be more battles to fight, both in the palace and in their hearts. There would be those who resisted, who fought against the truth. But as long as Solara stood by his side, he believed they could make a difference. They could change the future, one step at a time. In the quiet moments when he found himself alone with Solara, their conversations turned to more than just politics. They talked about the future, about what they could build together. And for the first time in years, Arden allowed himself to hope, to believe in something greater than the scars of the past. Together, they would face whatever came next.